Welcome to Archive Whispers, a place to fall asleep. Settle in, lower the lights, and let the archive open. Tonight, the road we are going to follow is not a road at all, but a river, the long and patient river that the Egyptians simply called Idaru, the Great Water, and that we have come to know as the Nile. We are somewhere in the south, on a quiet stretch of the bank, in the long-settled middle of the New Kingdom, some 33 centuries ago, on a day that no chronicle ever troubled to record. The river lies dark and broad in the last of the night, moving without sound toward a sea it will not reach for many days, and along its edge the reeds stand black against a sky that is only beginning, very faintly, to think about the morning. We are not going to witness any of the great matters of this age. There will be no pharaoh here, no temple dedication, no army moving south into Nubia, no name that the long record of Egypt thought worth the cutting into stone. We are not even going to follow a single person through the day, for the river belongs to no one and to everyone at once, to the fisherman and the ferryman and the boy minding the cattle. And most of the faces that pass along its banks are faces that history never bothered to keep. Instead, we are simply going to keep company with the river itself, with its water and its reeds, and its slow brown current across one unremarkable day, from the gray hour before the sun to the hour the last lamp is carried indoors. I should say, before we begin, that the daily life of the river is not a thing we have had to invent. A good deal of it is known, and known well, from the people who lived along the Nile and from the travelers who came after to stare at it. The shape of the year, the rising and the falling of the flood, we owe in part to Herodotus, who walked through Egypt with his endless questions, and to Strabo, who sailed up the river and wrote down what he saw. The boats and the nets and the patient work of the fields we owe to the tomb painters, who left whole walls of ordinary days, and to the careful modern labor of Barry Kemp, of Pierre Montet, of Rosalie David, and of others whose names wait in the description below, should you ever wish to follow the same green water yourself. What we are going to do then is to imagine a single ordinary stretch of the Nile on a single ordinary day, and to move along it slowly, in something close to the order the day itself would have followed. We will begin in the dark before the sun, when the river is only a sound and a coolness, and then we will watch the light come up over the eastern desert and lay itself across the water. We will go out with the fishermen into the reeds, and drift downstream with a cargo boat in the heat of the middle of the day, and sit on the bank in the long gold afternoon while the town goes quietly about its work. Nothing in particular is going to happen. That, in a sense, is rather the whole point. The river asks nothing of anyone but that they move at its own unhurried pace, and that tonight is very nearly all that we are going to ask of you as well. So if you are able, dim your lights now and let the room around you grow as soft and shadowed as the river before the morning. There is nothing here you need to follow, and nothing you need to remember. If your attention begins to drift, let it drift, and if you fall asleep somewhere in the warm middle of the day, then the river will have carried you exactly where an old day on the Nile was always meant to carry you. Settle in. Let your breath grow as slow and even as the current, the long brown current that has been moving north, without hurry and without end, since long before any of these names were written down. And let us go down, together and entirely unhurried, to the edge of the water in the dark. Before there is any light at all, there is the river, and the river is mostly a sound. It is the small, ceaseless conversation of moving water against the mud of the bank, the soft suck and release where the current works at a half-sunken root, the faint knocking of a moored boat nudged by the slow swell. The air over the water is cool, far cooler than it will be in only a few hours, and it carries the green and mineral smell of the Nile, the smell of silt and wet reed and fish, the oldest smell in this whole long country. Nothing is moving yet that you could see. The river simply goes on, broad and unhurried, carrying the dark north with it. For the people who live along it, this river is not one thing but two, and the line between them is sharp enough to stand upon. There is the black land, Kemet, the narrow ribbon of dark, rich soil that the flood lays down fresh each year on either bank, soil so dark and so fertile that the whole country took its name from it. And then, a stride or two beyond, there is the red land, Shred, the desert that begins where the water's gift runs out, pale and stony and endless, climbing away into the hills. A man can stand with 1 foot in the living mud and 1 foot in the dead sand, and in the gray of this hour, both are the same colorless shadow, waiting, like everything else, for the sun to tell them apart. The whole life of this place is bound to one slow rhythm, and it is the rhythm of the river rising and falling across the year. For most of its length the year is dry, the fields baked hard, the level of the water sinking lower and lower in its bed. And then, in the heat of the summer, fed by rains that fall in mountains no Egyptian has ever seen, the river begins, very gradually, to swell. It spreads out over the fields and covers them, and when at last it draws back, it leaves behind that fresh, dark mud, and with it the promise of another harvest. The day we are sitting in now is not a flood day. It is an ordinary day in the long part of the year, when the river is low and patient and keeps, for the most part, to its own broad channel. Far off to the east, beyond the river and beyond the strip of fields, and beyond the first low ridges of the desert, the sky has begun to change. It is not light yet, not anything you could call color, but the deep blue-black of the night has thinned, somewhere down at the rim of the world, into a paler and more uncertain gray. The stars over there have grown faint and few. The morning is coming, as it has come over this same river, for more mornings than there are grains of sand in the bank, and it comes without any sound at all, only this slow soaking of gray into the darkness, like ink drawn up into cloth. Down at the water's edge, where the mud is firm enough to stand on, the first of the fishermen has come out of the dark. He has come quietly, the way men come who do this every day of their lives, without lamp and without talk, knowing the path down the bank by the feel of it under his bare feet. He stands for a moment at the edge, a still shape against the paling river, and he looks at the water the way a farmer looks at his field, reading in its surface the things that only long habit can read. Then he bends to the small light boat drawn up on the mud, a slender thing of bound papyrus, and he begins, without hurry, to make it ready. The boat is a humble craft, and an old one, older in its design than the pyramids themselves. It is made of nothing but the river's own reeds, the tall green papyrus that grows in the marshes in great soft forests, cut and dried and bound into long tapering bundles, and then lashed together, bundle against bundle, until they make a shape that will hold a man and his catch and ride high on the water. It has no nails and no planks and no keel. It is light enough for one person to lift and carry on his shoulder, and when at last it grows waterlogged and tired, it costs nothing to let it go and to cut and bind another. Half the small boats on the river are made this way, and have been, time out of mind. He steps in, and the boat takes his weight with a soft give, and he pushes off from the mud with the butt of his pole, and the bank slides away behind him into the mist. For a few strokes, there is the small drip and dip of the pole, and the faint parting of the water at the prow. And then he lets the boat drift and goes still, and the river takes hold of it and turns it slowly with the current. Out here, away from the bank, the world is very wide and very quiet. The water and the mist and the paling sky run together with no clear line between them, and the man and his small reed boat hang in the middle of it all, a single dark mark on an immense soft grayness. And then, while he is sitting there, the thing happens that the whole night has been moving toward. Away in the east, over the low dark line of the desert hills, the first edge of the sun comes up. It does not come slowly. After all that patient grayness, it lifts clear of the horizon in only a few minutes, a disk of pale fire, and the light of it comes flat and level across the water and turns the whole surface of the river in one long breath, from gray to a soft beaten gold. The mist begins, very gently, to thin and lift. The reeds along the far bank, that were only shadow, stand up green and distinct, and the day, the ordinary day, has begun. With the light, the river wakes. It does not wake the way a city wakes, with noise and hurry, but the way a slow animal wakes, by small degrees. A heron that has stood all night in the shallows like a gray post unfolds itself and lifts, with 2 or 3 deep, unhurried beats of its wings, and glides low over the water to settle further along the bank. A file of ducks crosses the brightening sky. Somewhere among the reeds, a moorhen makes its small clucking complaint, and the fisherman, taking all of this in without a thought, for he has seen it 10,000 times, reaches now for his net and begins the patient work that has brought him out onto the cool water before the sun. The net goes out across the water with a soft sound, a wide pale circle that opens in the air and falls and sinks, the little weights along its hem carrying it down through the gold and the green into the dark. And then there is nothing to do but wait, and waiting is the larger part of this work. The man sits with the line resting loosely across his fingers, feeling the river through it, the small steady pull of the current, and now and then a faint living tremor that may be a fish and may be only a drifting weed. The boat turns idly. The sun climbs. The cool of the night begins, very slowly, to lift off the water, and the first real warmth of the day comes to rest on his bare shoulders. It is worth saying, while we drift here, that the river gives the people who live on it a great deal more than fish. It gives them the water they drink and the water that grows their grain. It gives them the papyrus for their boats and their mats and their sandals, and the same papyrus, beaten and dried into pale sheets, for the writing that holds the whole kingdom together. It gives them clay for their pots and their houses, and reeds for their roofs, and birds in their thousands in the marshes, and a broad, smooth road that runs the entire length of the land, on which a man may float downstream with the current or sail back upstream on the wind. To live beside this river is to be given, every single day, almost everything a life requires. After a while, the line tightens, gently, and then with a slow, steady weight, and the man draws it in, hand over patient hand, and lifts the net dripping from the river with a few fish turning silver inside it. He does not exclaim over them, or count them, or hurry. He takes them quietly into the wet basket at his feet, and shakes the net clean, and gathers it for the next cast, and looks out again across the brightening water. There will be other casts and other quiet hours before the heat of the day drives him in. For now, there is only the boat and the river and the climbing sun. and the simple, unremarkable rhythm of a morning's work on the oldest water in the world. A little way back from the water, where the firm ground rises just beyond the reach of the highest flood, there is a village, and the village too is beginning, in its slow way, to wake. It is a small huddle of houses built of mud, of the same dark river mud that grows the grain, shaped into bricks and dried in the sun and stacked into low, flat-roofed walls, the color of the earth they came from. The houses lean against one another along narrow lanes of beaten dust, and from the roofs, where families sleep on the warm nights, thin first threads of smoke have begun to rise as the breakfast fires are coaxed awake. Down the path to the river come the women of the village, as they come every morning, to fetch the day's water. They walk without haste, balancing the tall, rounded jars easily against a hip or upon a folded cloth on the head, and the empty jars knock together softly as they go. At the water's edge they crouch and let the jars drink, holding them under until the air is all bubbled out, and then they straighten, slowly, under the new weight, and turn back toward the houses. The river gives, and they carry, and the path between the two has been worn smooth and pale by the same patient errand repeated through more years than anyone could hope to number. Out beyond the houses, where the fields lie waiting for the next planting, a herdsman has brought his cattle down toward the water. They are the long-horned cattle of the valley, dun and patient, moving in a loose, unhurried line, and the dust they raise hangs gold in the low light behind them. At the river, they wade in to the knee and lower their heavy heads to drink, and the small sounds of them carry far in the morning quiet, the soft pull of their drinking, the slap of a tail, the occasional low call of one beast to another. The herdsman leans on his staff and watches, in no hurry at all, while the sun climbs another hand's breadth above the hills. The marshes along this part of the bank are wide and shallow and thick with reeds, and they are, in their quiet way, the busiest place on the whole river. Here the papyrus grows in soft green thickets, taller than a standing man, and among its stems the life of the water gathers in a great unhurried abundance. There are ducks and geese in their hundreds, dabbling and preening in the open lanes of water. There are herons and ibis stalking the shallows on careful legs. There are little birds without number that flit and chitter in the reed tops, and turtles sunning on a half-sunk log, and the slow swirl now and then of something larger moving below. To stand at the edge of the marsh in the morning is to stand at the edge of a whole patient world. Into this world, with great care, a fowler has poled his little reed boat. He goes silently, lying almost flat among the cut reeds he has heaped over himself for cover, letting the boat slide on the last of its momentum into a lane of open water where the birds are thick. He has with him a throwing stick, a curved length of polished hardwood, and a few decoy birds, and an endless patience. This is old work and pictured work, the same scene of a man among the reeds, hunting birds from a slender boat, is painted on the walls of tombs up and down the valley, repeated across 1,000 years, because it was, for so very long, simply one of the ordinary things a man did by the river in the morning. He does not, in the end, do very much. He waits and watches and lets a long while pass, and at some moment that only he can judge, he rises a little and sends the throwing stick spinning low across the water, and a bird or two is taken, and the rest of the birds lift together in a great clattering rush of wings that fills the whole sky over the marsh, and then, by slow degrees, settles again. The noise of it rolls away across the water and is gone, and the quiet comes back, deeper than before. The fowler gathers what he has and lies down again among his reeds, and the marsh, which forgets such things almost at once, closes over the small disturbance and returns to its slow business. Back at the village edge, the morning's work has spread itself out into the open air. A woman sits in the shade of a wall grinding grain, rocking the smooth upper stone back and forth over the lower with a slow, even motion, and the pale flour gathers grain by grain in the cloth beneath. Nearby, dough from yesterday's grinding is being shaped into flat loaves and set to bake on the hot ashes and on the sun-warmed face of a clay oven. The smell of baking bread drifts out over the lane, mixing with the smell of smoke and dust and animals. And it is, perhaps, the most ancient, comfortable smell there is. The smell that has meant morning and home and enough to eat for longer than there has been writing to record it. Children move through all of this the way children do, half helping and half playing, carrying small jars too big for them down to the water, chasing a goat that has slipped its tether, squatting at the river's edge to watch the minnows dart in the warm shallows. No one minds them very closely. The whole village is their keeper, and the river, for all that it gives, is a known and familiar neighbor rather than a danger. And the day is long, and there is time, on a morning like this, for a child to lie on the warm mud and look at the water for an hour and be scolded by no one. These are the hours that no chronicle keeps, and they are, very nearly, the best of all the hours there are. Along the bank a man is mending a boat, and it is worth pausing to watch him, because his patience is the patience of the whole river. The papyrus hull has grown soft and waterlogged at one end, and he is binding in fresh reed, drawing the cord tight and working it into the old lashing with a smooth, dark tool of bone. He does not measure, and he does not hurry. He has made and mended 100 such boats, and his hands know the work better than his eyes do. And as he works, he keeps up, under his breath, a low, tuneless thread of song, the kind of song that is less a song than a way of letting the time go by, rising and falling with the pull of the cord. The sun is well up now, and the cool of the morning has burned away, and the light on the water has lost its early softness and grown clear and strong. The shadows have drawn in close beneath the walls and the palms. The river, which an hour ago was a sheet of gold, is a broad band of deep green blue, moving steadily north, scattered all over with hard, bright points of light where the small wind off the desert troubles its surface. Out in the channel, the first of the larger boats is coming into view, a wooden vessel under a single broad sail, riding low with cargo, drifting down with the current toward whatever town or temple waits for it downstream. The fishermen who went out before dawn are coming in now, ahead of the heat, their boats sitting a little lower than when they left. They draw up on the mud below the village and lift out their baskets, and there is a small unhurried gathering at the landing, a handing over and a weighing in the eye, a quiet word or two. The day's catch divided and carried up to the houses or set aside, some of it to be split and salted and dried in the sun for the long part of the year when the river yields less. None of it is hurried. The fish will keep for the morning's work, and the morning's work here is never the kind that cannot wait another hour. And so the morning gathers itself toward noon. The water has been fetched, the bread is baked, the cattle have drunk and drifted back to graze, the birds have settled, the catch is in. The village draws a little into itself against the rising heat, finding the shade, slowing the pace of things still further. The river runs on as it always has, broad and green and unhurried, carrying its boats and its light north toward the sea. Nothing has happened that anyone will remember. Everything has happened that a morning is for. And out in the channel, the cargo boat drifts nearer, and it is to that boat, and to the long, warm middle of the day it carries, that we will turn next. The cargo boat that has been drawing nearer all morning is a broad-beamed vessel of acacia wood, built up from short planks pinned and lashed together in the old way, for the acacia of the valley grows in no great lengths, and a boat here is pieced together rather than carved. It rides low and steady, heavy with its load, and it comes down the river with the current under it, and its single wide sail loose and idle. For a boat going north, going downstream, has no need of the wind. It simply gives itself to the river and lets the great slow muscle of the current carry it along, and the steersman at the stern does little more than hold it true. Its cargo is the ordinary wealth of the valley. There are tall sealed jars of grain from an upstream estate, packed upright and close, and beside them squat amphorae of oil and of wine, their stoppers daubed with mud and pressed with a seal. There are bundles of dried reed and stacks of rough pottery, and somewhere beneath it all, lashed flat, a few pale blocks of stone quarried from the eastern hills, bound downstream for the endless building that the kingdom never quite finishes. None of it is treasure. All of it is the slow, ordinary traffic of a country held together by its river, the grain and the oil and the stone moving, as they have always moved, on the patient brown back of the Nile. The crew is small, and at this hour, with the current doing the work, they have very little to do. One man sits in the bow with his legs hanging over the side, watching the water ahead for the pale swirls that mark a sandbank in the channel, and now and then calling back a soft word to the steersman. The rest have settled into the patches of shade where they can find it, in the lee of the cargo or beneath a square of cloth rigged on two poles, and they doze, or talk in low voices, or chew at a piece of bread and an onion. The boat carries them, and the river carries the boat, and for these slow hours of the middle of the day there is, quite genuinely, almost nothing that anyone is required to do. The heat of the middle of the day settles over the whole river like a soft, heavy hand. It comes up off the water, and down out of the white sky, and in off the desert from every side together, and it presses the land into stillness. The colors of the morning bleach out of things. The green of the reeds goes gray-gold. The blue of the water goes pale and hard. The far banks waver and swim a little in the rising air. Sound carries strangely, or doesn't carry at all. The birds have gone quiet and still in the shade of the reeds. Even the river seems to slow, though it does not, and the whole long valley holds its breath through the worst of the heat and waits, with the patience of a country that has done this every day, forever, for the cool of the evening to come. On the bank, where the fields come down close to the water, a single figure is at work through all of this heat, because the work he is doing cannot wait. He is lifting water from the river to the field above with a shaduf, a simple and patient machine, no more than a long pole balanced across an upright frame, with a bucket of leather and reed hung at one end, and a heavy lump of dried mud at the other, for a weight. He pulls the bucket down to the river, lets it fill, and then lets the counterweight do the lifting, swinging the full bucket up and around to pour into the channel that feeds his field, and then he lowers it again, and again, and again, in a slow creaking rhythm that goes on for hours. It is humble work and endless, and it is also, in a way the man himself might never put into words, the whole secret of the country. For the river, left to itself, waters only the narrow strip it floods each year. Everything beyond that, every field that has been coaxed out of the desert's edge, is held green by exactly this, by water lifted a bucket at a time, by channels scratched into the earth and tended and cleared, by the patient daily labor of countless hands along the whole length of the valley. The grain in the jars on the cargo boat grew because someone, somewhere upstream, stood in the heat and worked a shaduf through the long afternoons. The kingdom of temples and tombs and pharaohs rests, in the end, on this. The cargo boat passes the man at his shaduf, without either of them taking much notice of the other, for both are simply part of the river's ordinary day. It passes too, a boat coming the other way, upstream, and here the difference between the two directions shows itself plainly. The upstream boat cannot drift. It must work for every length it gains. Its great sail is hauled up full and taut, leaning into the steady north wind that blows up the valley against the current almost the whole year round, and it leans and shoulders its way south, slow but certain, while its own crew sits idle and the wind does the labor. North on the water, south on the wind. The river and the air between them carry a boat either way it needs to go. From the deck of the drifting boat, the banks slide past with a slowness that is almost a kind of sleep. A grove of date palms comes into view and holds for a long while, their crowns hanging still in the heat, and then very gradually falls behind. A stretch of pale reed gives way to a low mud brick hamlet, and then to reed again. A white heron stands in the shallows and does not move as the boat goes by. Now and then, a small mark of human life shows itself at the water's edge. A woman rinsing cloth, a child watching, a man asleep in the shade of his beached boat, and each one rises into view, holds for a moment, and slips away behind, like a thought you do not quite finish before another takes its place. There is a small clay brazier set on a bed of sand near the stern, and one of the crew has roused himself to make the midday meal, which is no great matter, only bread warmed on the coals, and a few of the fish bought that morning from a passing skiff, split and laid on the embers until the skin blisters and lifts. They eat sitting where they are, in the shade, with their fingers, passing a jar of warm flat beer from hand to hand, and they talk a little of the river and the wind and the price of grain downstream. And then they fall quiet again. The boat drifts on. A thread of smoke from the dying brazier leans away over the water and disappears. If you were to lie back now on the warm planks of the deck, in the shade of the cargo, and look up, you would see the single great sail hanging slack above you against the white sky, and the mast swaying very slightly, very slowly, as the boat rocks on the broad water. You would feel the planks warm beneath you and the faint shudder of the current along the hull, and you would hear the small sounds of the river, the lap and gurgle at the bow, the creak of the steering oar in its lashing, a sailor shifting in his sleep, and very far off, carried thin across the water, the creak of that same shaduf, still lifting water to its field, and you would find it very hard, lying there, to keep your eyes from closing. The river here is wide, and in places it divides, slipping around long, low islands of silt and reed that it has built up over the years, and may, in some later flood, carry away again. The steersman knows them all, knows where the deep channel runs, and where the water shoals to a hand's depth over a hidden bar, and he reads the surface as easily as a scribe reads a familiar hand, steering the loaded boat down the safe green road through the middle of it all by signs that a stranger would never see. On one of the islands, a few goats have been left to graze the reeds, and they lift their heads to watch the boat go by, and then bend again to their browsing, and the island slides slowly astern. And so the long middle of the day goes by, hour after slow hour, with the boat drifting north and the sun beginning, at last, almost imperceptibly, to lean down out of the center of the sky toward the western desert. The fiercest of the heat has passed its peak. The light, when you look again, has just begun to thicken and warm at its edges, to lose the hard white glare of noon and take on, very faintly, the first deep gold of the afternoon. Ahead, where the river bends, and a low bluff of pale rock comes down toward the water, the roofs and walls of a riverside town are coming into view, and it is there, at its busy, patient quay, that the afternoon of our slow day will unfold. The town that the river has been carrying us toward is no great city, only a modest provincial place, a few hundred souls clustered where a good landing and a stretch of firm ground and a road up from the water have drawn people together, since longer than anyone remembers. Its houses climb back from the bank in close, pale tiers of mud brick, washed here and there with a thin coat of white that has gone the color of old bone. Above the low roofs rise a few taller things: the blank pylon wall of a small temple, the crowns of a sycamore grove, a granary's rounded domes, and over it all hangs the soft haze of dust and wood smoke that hangs over every town in the valley in the long gold afternoons. The quay is the busiest place in the town, and even here, the word busy means something gentler than it would to us. There is a stone-faced landing, worn smooth and round at its edge by the rubbing of 1,000 hulls, and along it a handful of boats lie moored, our cargo boat among them now, easing in against the others with a soft nudge and a thrown line caught and looped over a worn wooden post. Men move unhurriedly between the boats and the shore, a jar on a shoulder, a bundle on a back, calling out to one another in the flat carrying voices of people who have all the afternoon to do what needs doing. The river slaps quietly at the stone. The work gets done at the pace of the water. At a little folding table set in the shade at the head of the landing sits a scribe, and of all the people at the quay, he is perhaps the most at his ease, for his is the work the kingdom values above almost any other, and he need not lift or carry anything heavier than a reed pen. Before him is a smooth board and a half-unrolled sheet of papyrus, and a wooden pallet with 2 cakes of ink, black and red, and a little pot of water. As each boat unloads, he watches and counts and notes down what comes ashore: the jars of grain, the measures of oil, the bundles and the blocks, his pen moving in quick, small strokes that dry almost at once in the warm air. Nothing moves through this town that the scribe does not write down. Back from the quay, where 2 lanes meet in a small open space of beaten earth, the town holds the nearest thing it has to a market. There are no shops and no stalls in any fixed sense, only people who have something to trade sitting on mats in the shade with their goods spread before them, and other people wandering slowly among them. There is no money here, for coin has not yet come to Egypt. Everything is barter and balance. This measure of grain against that jar of oil, a fish against an onion, a length of cloth against a day's labor owed, all of it weighed and reckoned and gently argued in the slow, patient voices of people who know one another and have known one another all their lives. In a yard off one of the lanes, a potter is at his work, and his is among the oldest and most patient of all the crafts of the valley. He sits low beside a simple turning wheel, a heavy disc of wood or stone that he keeps moving with one hand or a bare foot, while the other hand shapes the wet river clay, rising between his fingers. From the same dark mud that grows the grain and builds the houses, he draws up jar after jar, bowl after bowl, the walls thinning and rising under the steady pressure of his hands. And each one, when it is finished, is set aside on a board in the sun, to harden before the firing. The clay is the rivers, and the water is the rivers, and the slow-turning patience of the work is the rivers too. Down at the lower end of the landing, a little apart from the cargo work, a ferryman keeps his crossing. The river here is too wide, and too deep to ford, and the town on this bank has fields and kin on the far one, and so all day long the ferryman poles and paddles his broad flat boat back and forth across the green water, carrying whoever needs to go, a farmer in his hoe, a woman with a basket, a donkey standing patient and unhappy in the middle of the boat. He asks little for the crossing, a small share of whatever his passengers carry, and he knows every face that lives within a morning's walk, and his slow back and forth across the river is one of the quiet threads that holds the two banks of the town into a single place. Above the town, where the ground rises a little and the noise of the quay falls away, stands the small temple, and around it the air seems to grow quieter and cooler of its own accord. It is not one of the great temples whose names have come down to us. It is a modest house of a local god, a god of this town and this reach of the river, with a blank sloping wall of pale stone, a single doorway deep in shadow, and beyond it courts that ordinary people do not enter. A priest in white linen crosses the forecourt without haste and disappears within. A thin, sweet thread of incense drifts out on the warm air. Whatever is done in there is done quietly, behind the wall, as it has been done every afternoon for longer than the town itself has stood, in the shade of a great spreading sycamore near the temple, where the ground is cool and the leaves filter the light to a soft, moving green. A few of the older people of the town have gathered to sit out the warmest hours, as they do every day. They sit on low stools or on the bare, swept earth, and they talk or they do not talk, and they watch the lane and the river below, and the slow hours pass over them like the shadows of the leaves. Now and then, one of them says something, and the others consider it, and a while later, one of them answers, and that is the whole shape of the conversation, unhurried as the water, with long, easy silences in it that no one feels any need to fill. The cargo boat, meanwhile, has been unloaded, the jars and bundles carried up and tallied and stored, and now it lies light and high at the quay, rocking a little, its work for the day all but done. Some of its load will go no further. Some will wait here for another boat going on downstream, and into the empty space along its deck, a new cargo is already, slowly, beginning to come, the produce of this town and its fields. More grain, more pots, a few baskets of dates, bound for somewhere further north. But that is tomorrow's affair, or the affair of the last hour of light. For now the crew, paid off for the day in bread and beer and a measure of grain, have scattered into the town to find what comfort an evening in a strange place affords. The light is changing now in earnest. The sun has swung far over to the west, out beyond the desert hills on the far bank, and it has begun to redden and to swell as it falls, and the whole quality of the afternoon has deepened and grown gold and long. The shadows reach out from the western walls clear across the lanes. The dust in the air catches the low light and turns the spaces between the houses to soft hanging curtains of gold. The river, which all day has been first silver and then hard blue-green, has begun to take on the color of the sky, to glow faintly from within, so that the boats upon it seem to float on a sheet of pale fire. All along the bank, the day's last errands are being quietly finished before the light goes. The women come down once more to the river to fill the jars for the evening and to rinse the dust of the day from their feet, and the water they draw up is warm now on the surface from the long sun. The cattle are brought down a final time to drink before they are folded for the night. A man stands knee-deep in the shallows, washing the mud from a hoe. The ferryman makes his last crossing, his boat a black shape against the burning water, and everywhere the talk grows softer and slower. The way talk does as the light fails, settling toward the long quiet of the night, and then the sun touches the line of the western hills and rests there a moment, enormous and deep red and strangely soft to look upon, and the whole valley holds still to watch it go, as it has watched it go every evening since the first evening of the world. For the people of this river, the setting of the sun is not merely the end of a day, it is the oldest and the greatest of all their stories. The sun god going down into the west, into the land of the dead beyond the desert, to make his long dark journey through the hours of the night and to be born again, if all is well, at dawn. They watch it sink without fear, for it has always come back, and they turn, as its last red rim slips below the hills, toward the lamps and the quiet of their homes. The light does not leave the valley in a single stroke. It gathers itself slowly out of the lanes and up the walls and off the water, and for a long while after the sun is gone, the sky holds a deep and deepening color, rose and amber, and at last a soft dusty violet, and the river holds it too, lying broad and still and pale between its darkening banks. The air begins to cool. The heat that has soaked into the mud brick all day breathes gently back out of the walls, and one by one, in the houses along the bank, the small lamps are lit, and their low, warm light begins to show, here and there, in the gathering blue of the evening. Down at the quay, the boats have all come in. They lie moored along the landing and drawn up on the mud, dark and still, rocking very gently where the last of the current reaches them, their masts bare against the fading sky. The cargo boat that carried us through the middle of the day lies among them, quiet now, its deck swept, its lines made fast, its long day's drifting done. No one works the water after dark. The river at night is left to itself, to the fish and the birds, and the slow unsleeping current, and the boats wait along the shore, patient as the cattle in their fold, for the gray hour and the next slow day. In the houses, the evening meal is a small and simple thing, taken by lamplight, sitting on mats on the swept earth floor, bread and beer and onions, perhaps a little of the day's fish, a few dates for sweetness at the end. The talk is low and easy, the talk of people at the end of an ordinary day, of the catch and the crossing and the boats that came and went, of who was at the market and what was said in the shade of the sycamore. Nothing that will be remembered tomorrow, nothing that needs to be. And outside the low doorways, the dark comes down over the river and the fields, soft and complete, and the lamps inside burn low and warm, and the long night settles over the valley. And above all of it, as the last color drains from the western sky, the stars come out over the river. They come out slowly at first, one and then another in the deep clear violet, and then, as the dark grows complete, in their thousands and their tens of thousands, a great soft drift of them spilled across the whole black width of the sky, brighter and nearer here, over the desert, than they are almost anywhere else on earth. The river lies dark and broad below them, and it catches them, here and there, in a faint scatter of trembling light upon the water, so that there are stars above and stars below, and the boats and the reeds hang in the still dark between. The lamps in the houses are burning lower now. One by one, along the bank, they are pinched out or left to gutter and fail, and the warm, small lights that freckled the dark go out, one by one, and the houses sink back into the greater dark of the night. A dog settles somewhere with a sigh. A child, half asleep, is carried in from a rooftop. The voices have nearly all gone quiet, and the village, which woke so slowly this morning out of the gray, lets go of the day just as slowly now. sinking by soft degrees into sleep, while the river runs on past it in the dark, broad and patient and unhurried, exactly as it ran before anyone was there to watch it. Let us go down, one last time, to the edge of the water in the dark, where we began. The reeds stand black and still against the stars. The mud is cool now underfoot, and the small reed boat lies drawn up where the fisherman left it, dark and quiet, its day's work done. The river moves past, broad and slow and almost silent, the same small ceaseless conversation of water against the bank that was here before the dawn, the soft suck and release, the faint knocking of a moored hull, the oldest sound in this whole long country. Nothing has changed. The day has come and gone, and the river has not noticed it at all, and the river will go on. That is, in the end, the whole of what there is to say about it. When the fisherman is asleep, and the scribe's papyrus is rolled and put away, and the potter's wheel is still, and the lamps are all gone out, the river will go on, moving north through the dark, broad and slow and patient, past the sleeping town and the folded cattle and the drawn-up boats, past the temple and the fields, and the black standing reeds, carrying the starlight on its back toward a sea it will not reach for many days. It went on like this last night, and the night before, and for 10,000 nights before that, and it will go on like this long after this particular ordinary day has been forgotten by everyone, as nearly all the days there have ever been are forgotten. If you are still awake, let your eyes close now, and do not trouble to follow the words any further. There is nothing more that you need to do. The day on the river is over, and it asks nothing of you, and it asks nothing of you now, but that you let it carry you off, the way it carried the boats, the way it carried the light, gently and without hurry, north into the dark. Let the small sound of the water be the last thing. Let the reeds stand black against the stars. Let the lamp gutter and go out, and let the slow brown current take you quietly wherever it is that the river goes. The water against the bank, the soft suck and release, the faint knocking of the moored hull, the cool of the mud and the black reeds, and the stars above and the stars below. The broad, slow, patient current, moving north in the dark, without hurry and without end. There is nothing here you need to follow. There is nothing here you need to remember. The river will hold all of it for you. The morning and the heat, and the long gold afternoon, the nets and the boats and the lamps, and it will carry them on, gently through the night, while you let go of them, one by one, and sink down softly towards sleep. Far off in the east, though it is many hours away yet, the gray will come again, as it always comes. The sky at the rim of the desert will thin and pale. The first fisherman will come quietly down to the water in the dark. The herons will lift from the shallows, and the women will come for the water, and the lamps will be lit, and the boats will go out, and the whole slow ordinary day will begin again, exactly as it began this morning, exactly as it has begun every morning, on the oldest water in the world. But that is far away, and there is no need to wait for it. For now there is only the dark, and the stars, and the slow sound of the river, and sleep. Sleep now, if you have not already. The day is put away, the boats are moored, and the nets are dry, and the lamps are out, and the river is dark. There is nothing left to tend, and nothing left to carry. The current moves on without you, broad and slow and kind, and it does not need you to watch it, and it does not need you to stay awake. Let your breath be as slow as the water. Let the reeds stand black against the stars. Let the night be long and soft and complete. And let the river, the old and patient river, carry you the rest of the way down into sleep. And the river goes on, through the dark, and through the silence, and through the long hours of the night, past the sleeping town and the still boats and the black standing reeds. It goes on, broad and slow and unhurried, carrying the stars upon its back, north toward a sea it will not reach for many days, exactly as it did before any of us were here to watch it, and exactly as it will when we are gone. The water against the bank, the soft suck and release, the slow brown current, moving on in the dark. Rest now. The river has you, and it will carry you gently and without end until the morning. You've reached the end of tonight's archive. If you're still awake, thank you for staying. And if you drifted off somewhere in the dark, then it did its work. Rest now. The next chapter will be here when you are. Sleep well. This has been Archive Whispers.